Hey everybody, welcome to another Retro Game Night. I am Damian DiCarlo. I am hosting here with a couple of other hosts. I got Earl Lawrence, player 2.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Also got player 3, Michael Losi. Hello, sir.
How's it going, guys?
Another day in the retro gaming world. I am so happy and excited. Are you guys excited?
Yeah.
Yes.
Really amazing.
Come on, Earl. You know you are. You're good at this game.
Come on.
Near
Earl.
and dear. I love the fighting games for sure.
Okay, all right. Just checking, Earl. A lot of people are also listening to this show, not seeing his face, but he's smiling. He is ear to ear smiles on this one. We have an amazing topic tonight. Mortal Kombat, the very first one. We want to look back. This is because in light of MK1 was just announced recently for the newer systems, PS5, Xbox Series X, or whatever they're on right now. And with that, I think comes with some questioning. I know that it's a reboot. I know that they're having some old school characters as a throwback. It's kind of a big deal. So you look back at Mortal Kombat, and I decided to get with these guys, and we did some gaming tonight. Before this recording, we decided to jump in on some Mortal Kombat action, old school style. And let's talk about it. I mean, I think that this is probably the most fun I've had in a while playing a fighting game. Mortal Kombat, the original, we did the Super Nintendo version, we did the Sega Genesis version, and we did the arcade version. So, I think we should dive in. What do you guys say?
Yeah, let's dive in. Huge variances between all of them.
Finish him.
Let's do it. So we're looking back at the history of Mortal Kombat. Let's start with talking about what most people know. This started in 1992. This was an arcade cabinet release here in North America. This debuted very well for its time. This was something that was in direct competition with Street Fighter. There was a lot of throwback I remember about this game playing in the arcade. I only did it a few times. It was obviously a little controversial given the violence, which we'll get into with how later they did like some ratings when it came to home consoles. But I'll ask you guys, let's talk about a little bit of your memories about the game before playing tonight. Earl, what are some of the memories you remember of this game when you were younger?
Man, getting this game was pretty epic in itself, right? So you had these real life fighters, and you're going through the music when it starts off the intro. My fond memory is playing with my brother, who's 15 months older than me, so we're pretty close, and it got really competitive. Trying to learn all the moves and the fatalities and everything. That was like the key. If you couldn't pull off a fatality, you're kind of like, you didn't deserve to win. Like it was one of those, like you bring it back and you're like, come on, you're kind of rooting for it, and the pressure's on too, with all the stages. One thing that stood out with this game compared to Street Fighter is how gory this was. I remember watching it, was just like, holy smokes, that's crazy. Like the design factor of it, everything that they did, all the blood, and again, we're talking about different consoles had different type of I want to say play where, again, I think there was censorship involved too because of how gory it was. But it was fun. It was competitive. I remember playing with a bunch of friends, and learning the moves, I think in itself was one that you wanted to master as soon as you plugged it in, and you had the, your go-to guide of whatever the moves were, and you tried to master a character or master all the characters. And I think that was one where you really wanted to learn everything because this game was epic as soon as you plugged it in.
Was this something that you and Manny, your brother, played at home predominantly? Is this more, was it that you did, or was it also the arcade you guys did?
Both. I remember going to the mall, getting dropped off, and make sure I have some quarters. And for the most part, it was also at home. We would practice, and I would say practice, but we would play. But you really want to play it well. You don't want to be the one that's just mashing on buttons. Like you wanted to actually do all the
you wanted to do real moves.
Yeah.
That was a huge thing in like 90s. I remember when we would play games, I think the ultimate the most offensive thing you could hear from another player was like, "Oh, you're just button mashing.
Yeah,
You're just button mashing, bro." Like
yeah,
that you don't want that to happen. You want to be, "No, I know this move," and you keep doing it over and over and over.
And I think the thing about this game, if you did the fatality at the end, if you won, then you were like, okay, this is a legit player, or I'm a legit player. Guess what? I just did that, and yeah. But for the most part, going back to the question, it was primarily at home playing it, and it would be playing for hours, and you're just going, rounds, and you try to also do the single player game too, where they had all these little side missions when you try to do the break of the bricks or the wood, and yeah, it was really cool.
Losi, how about you? What are some of the memories you remember of this game? And tell me, like, when did you first play it, and how did that go?
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of interesting take because I feel like I'm the opposite of Earl actually when it comes to this.
Not
we
just
kind of had this conversation. Yeah, we're having this conversation earlier though, and when I originally think of consoles, like my primary games growing up was usually like more of your RPG and sports related games. Back home though, there was Me and Ed's Pizza. This is the pizza parlor back home. They made the greatest pizzas, and going there though, we were either playing some racing games or fighting games, and Mortal Kombat being one of those.
Right.
So to me, that's really what this brought back. It was that again, that competitive feel though, like Earl did mention. To me, that's what Mortal Kombat really embraced, was just like, how long can I last on my quarters against my friends type of thing. And I will admit though, I was never that good at Mortal Kombat in itself. I was one of those quote unquote button smashers, and yeah, I button mashed all day, and sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. I try to get good just with one or two characters, make sure I just knew one or two moves.
You held your own today.
Just make it work, just make it work.
Make it work, yeah. Sometimes you just learn through, I don't know, being thrown into the deep end of the pool, sometimes.
Yeah, but there's something about being at the pizza parlor, no matter what, even if you won or lost, it was, like you said, this was probably one of the more fun nights we've had in a while. Like, yeah, just being in that atmosphere, playing again with all you guys, that was really fun.
So let's tap into that. That is the basis of Retro Game Night. And when I started this originally, it was almost different set of friends, almost polar opposite to you guys in a lot of ways. But a lot of what we did that we have in common, that you guys have in common with them, is the love of the nostalgia. And I think anyone that will listen to this or watch the show, I think that they will agree that it's just truly based on not how great the graphics look now, how great it can appear on my TV. We'll take a crappy, shitty TV and we will literally play this and we will be just fine. And that's because of the nostalgic part of it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I remember very, very vividly 1993 being that release at home consoles. But it met with a little controversy. And this was where we started seeing the birth of ESRB ratings. If anyone is going down memory lane, remembered when getting a game, there was always a little rating at this point in time. When at the bottom right corner, it was either GA, it was mature, teen, adult. I mean, there was many different ratings at this point in time. And this game in particular was one of the ones that sparked that. What do you guys think about looking back as adults? Some of us are fathers. How do we look at the violence today? I'm gonna open up that box.
Losi, go.
Yeah, no, that's a big one, because I remembered a little bit about this, and then when I researched again, I'm like, yeah, this was actually a much bigger ordeal than I kind of even made it out to be at that time. But like you mentioned, this was the kind of the foundation for the ESRB. This is why they needed to start assigning levels of age for appropriateness to certain titles based on its violence and certain adult content. But this went up to literally the American political system. I believe it was Joseph Lieberman, former presidential candidate. And I actually looked up this thing that he had said. I think this is great. Give me 1 second here. But I have it on this other tab. Violent video games may become the Cabbage Patch Dolls of the 1993 holiday season. But Cabbage Patch Dolls never oozed blood, and kids weren't taught to rip off their heads. We're talking about video games that glorify violence and teach children to enjoy inflicting the most gruesome forms of cruelty imaginable. That's how this game was portrayed, right?
Yeah.
That's some like pretty strong language, and I mean he's relating this to the Cabbage Patch. I don't know.
It's crazy.
It was that was some demonic.
So as kids at the time, I mean, we're about the same age, all of us. So I don't think we really cared or paid attention to that kind of thing. But we look at it now, and whether it's like, oh, I'm sure it's not a big deal now at this point with what games are out there. But if we put ourselves in that point in time as parents and in that position, I mean, that is a big deal.
Because we had to ask mom or dad, hey, I love to buy Mortal Kombat, from the local Walmart, Target, Kmart, whatever it was. But they might have just seen that on the news where this famous senator is talking about this, and so of course they're gonna have this.
And it
was a big thing.
It definitely was that. They had to compete. They like you talked about, Damien. They had to put a budget out there. The one that they were competing with was Street Fighter, right? So they had to step it up. And if you think about what they did and the games that came after it, Killer Instinct, a couple of years later, it set the platform where, yes, there's this rating system, but at the same point, I mean, we weren't thinking like, oh, this is, you're as a gamer, you're playing the game and you're enjoying, you're playing the game, you're listening to sound effects, you're seeing all the stuff that's going on. I think you just build yourself into this game and you're kind of absorbed in it. And I think there's a point where you're just like, dude, this is awesome. There's these new things that just come out and they push the envelope. This one pushed the envelope with all the fatalities and how crazy it went and how far back, I
mean, let's be real. That's what made the game amazing. As a kid, you're like, oh, the fatalities, and yet that's the exact same thing that made the concern.
Absolutely. And then you have the stages, one that, it's the one where, you're on this bridge and you were to knock someone off and they fall into this spike thing. You're just like, holy shit, that's crazy, But again, you're playing the game, you're just like, all right, this is cool. But you're right. There's points when, my parents would watch the news and they'd be like, oh, well, you have this game and should you be playing this game, and what's it gonna do to your psyche as a young kid,
like any concerned parent would be. It's not like they were being a major drag in hindsight. Like maybe back in the day we would be like, oh, come on, no big deal. But looking back, it's pretty freaking crazy. Like you had fatalities where Kano would rip someone's heart out. You would have like Sub-Zero ripping a guy's head and spine out. And, there's all these fatalities, which to this day, we still played it and we're in our late 30s and we're still getting thrilled over fatalities. But I mean, in the day, if you're looking at that for the first time in a game, it could be very concerning. I can see that. But at the same time, there's a lot to be said. I think and this is the concept I wanted to throw out with this episode. I think that the people, and I'll say even us, I think people in general, when it comes to Mortal Kombat, are so focused on the violence, whether it's really ultra cool or really ultra concerning in a bad way. The point that I think we should really make it a point to talk about is the impact it has made on the gaming industry. That's something that, most people forget about. That is something we need to talk about. This gaming, retro gaming platform that we do this on, there's so much to talk about, and whatever old games have spawned brand new ones in different versions in different ways. Mortal Kombat is like what on number 12 now with this MK1. This is like the 12th entry, and that's just the official one. There's been dozens of side games. There's been dozens of side stories. There's been a TV show back in the day. There was an animated show. There's been multiple movies. This is huge. This is a big deal. This game came out of four people that made this game happen in Midway. That's it. It was 4 guys that made this happen. And I'm sure them looking at it now, it's just like, I can't believe what it's become over just something that they probably didn't know exactly how they were going to go about it. They were figuring it out. I know 6 months it took for them to come out with the actual name. They threw out like things like, I don't know, Fatality as a name. They threw out all these other names I can't think of right now, but there was a lot of different names they couldn't figure out until someone decided to put Mortal Kombat together. Huge deal. Huge deal.
So I got a couple of list of the names here: Qmite,
Nice.
Dragon Attack, Death Blow, and
Death
Fatality. Death Blow sounds very 80s-ish, right?
So yeah, totally. I can't see any of those sounding cooler than Mortal Kombat, honestly.
Same here. I was like, I don't know. Yeah, let's go plug in Death Blow. I don't know. Mortal Kombat just sticks, and I think they chose the right name. And now it's this franchise that we're talking about how many years later now? Holy,
Almost 30 years later.
Almost 30 years later, we're still talking about it, and they're still creating games. And I remember the movies, like you were just talking about the shows, the movies, and that movie was a hit. I remember watching it as a kid, and like I was telling you guys earlier, I was doing martial arts, and the song that they had in the movie, and it just, you could hear it now play. You're just like, oh yeah, Mortal Kombat. Dun-dun-dun-dun. Yeah,
you were like a little Karate Kid.
yeah.
Guarantee you, every single one of us had Mortal Kombat on our iPods growing up.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if they had iPods, yeah, but you're right.
Did.
Yes, yeah.
Everyone did.
A burned CD. I had a burned CD with Mortal Kombat on it.
Oh, don't age yourself. Oh, too late.
Pop-up music for sure.
This game I remember too. The talk of the town was, there was one particular hidden character in the game, and there was Reptile, and there was a way to get to him. Which if you were on the pit stage, there was a way to do a certain. It was, I believe, 2 flawless victories and 1 fatality. And then you could unlock to fight him. Not unlock him because you can't play as him in this game. But I remember in school, kids would talk about it. Yeah, I could get to Reptile. And I'm like, what is Reptile? Like, I had no idea. And there was no internet. This was before internet. So not only did you have to learn moves.
Yeah.
Yeah, good luck with that, right? Like, how do you learn moves in 1992? And then you had to figure out from your friends these things in the game. You're like, okay, cool. Well, there's another character. Awesome. So you'd figure it out. And I think that's something I love about Retro Game Night, our podcast, talking about these things that, in contrast, I mean, we did an episode not too long ago about Zelda and how back in the day we had to bust out like what would look like a big Thomas map to get through everywhere. And now it's like, oh, you can just YouTube it or find I'm sure a picture online. It wasn't easy back then with Mortal Kombat. You had to figure these things out, or you had to like do it by mistake, or your friend told you at school.
It was a lot of peer-to-peer sharing, and that's how you network back in the day.
Yeah.
Minus, with now that we have Google, you Google something, you Google a game, and it'll give you all those cheat codes or how you get to these Easter eggs.
Like the code books in the grocery store, right? You have the grocery store.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's right there too. When you buy the game, they have it on Electronics Boutique or KB Toys, and it would be right there too, right in front. Like, oh, do you want to buy this? Yeah,
that the programmers would totally like put those secrets out there.
Yep, they're like, for $9.99, you can get this book with all the.
Yeah, they would bank on that. No kid will not buy this book.
Exactly.
So this game in 1993 had several releases. It had a Super Nintendo version, Sega Genesis, Game Boy, and Game Gear. Tonight we played just main of the console ones. We played Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. There was a lot of censorship. Maybe this was something that you guys had forgotten until we played again, but no blood in these games unless in Sega Genesis you had the blood code, which was just an input of a certain couple of buttons at the intro of the game. Punching in the game of Super Nintendo had sweat. Fatalities had almost nothing coming off their bodies. It was just uppercuts and very violent kicks. And I know a lot of people didn't like that. It was something that, this was a result of the censorship. Looking back, what was that like playing tonight as far as just that aspect? Not talking graphics, not talking music. What was that like being kind of like robbed the keys of the Ferrari for a second?
I'll jump in really quick, Earl, just because there was definitely something when we finally, because we played the arcade version last. And I remember doing my like first major punch with Sonya, and blood came out. And like I don't know what it was about it, but like I was like, dude, hell yeah! Like it wasn't a fatality or anything like that, but like it got me way more pumped up. I wanted to do it again or something. I don't know. It was a weird thing, but like it totally did add to the game. I will say that. And looking back, I'm just with that being missing, there was a difference, and I'm particularly glad, I guess, that I just grew up with the arcade version, because to me that was the pinnacle of the series. And it's just sad because that was the original release of it, and then to see the post-production re-releases on the console versions were, they were watered down, like you said, they were made a little bit more, I don't know, family friendly or whatever. But
Super Nintendo was super concerned about that, and looking through the research I did, it's like Super Nintendo, or Nintendo in general, that is a big going on a limb, because violent video games was not its forte. It was known as a very family friendly computer system. I think about as violent as it got back in the day was like Contra, something like very shoot 'em up. But this was a big move for them. And then Sega Genesis, of course, was kind of already appealing to the arcade style graphics. That's like how they marketed Genesis back in the day. It was like bring the arcade home kind of thing. Yeah. So it was. I can see that what you mean. I know that it's missing. I'm very torn in 2023 to say some of this, because it's like I enjoyed the violence, and that sounds really horrible to say, in 2023 with things going on, and there's a lot of concern of safety, and we have families, and it's weird because you're torn by nostalgia, you're torn a little bit by, it's fantasy, but there has to be something said for people that, I don't want to say they can't handle it. There's people out there that take gaming to another level that goes beyond their realm of reality. I know that sounds super, colorful how I say that, but if they take it to a step where some games affect their real life, maybe it's not the right kind of game for you or your child if you're supervising. So I think it's safe to say the three of us are probably the most nonviolent people. Just I've taken martial arts too, and yet it's like not really, you're taught first and foremost violence is not the main thing of it. It's about the discipline. It's about, defending, but it's never about truly harming someone. And in this case, you have superpowers, it's supernatural. You got a lot of, you have a demon sorcerer involved. I mean, it is very fantasy, but I kind of want to know, Earl, like on your point of view, like where does that fit to you at this day and age? You being a dad, and like, obviously it was a guilty pleasure for you tonight. You liked it, but what do you think?
Yeah. I think the maturity level that you want to view things is, there's movies that are made too, right? That push the envelope. Right. Video games, same thing, right? If you can have that maturity level to differentiate and to be like, what, this is just a game, you're playing with friends, again, you're not going to take this into the real world. Again, it's a fantasy, you're playing a video game, you're watching a movie. If, there's those certain things, it takes a certain type of individual to bring that to real life. But, I do want to give a shout out, because we were talking about the gameplay, for Mike Losi for bringing those those controllers over that made it the real arcade feel. And like I said, we played the Super Nintendo version, and shout out to Damien for bringing out the mini consoles that had both Sega and the Super Nintendo version to play all three, and then to do it with the arcade version with the joystick and obviously, we were messing with the little buttons a little bit, like we didn't kind of have it all together, but we played it and it was fun. Long story short, with that, going back to your question, I think that's what it is. You have to make sure you understand you're just playing a game. Same if you're just watching a movie, you just kind of live in the moment for what it is, and, just don't go crazy.
Don't go crazy about it.
Don't go crazy.
That's the best way. That's the best way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to talk just really quick, because we talked about the ESRB thing, and I think this kind of justifies all of that, really. And because in hindsight, that was super controversial. And a lot of people were either on both sides of the fence, right? They thought it was either super necessary or they thought it was like government overreach type of thing, right?
Right.
But now with that being said, I feel like, okay, so if you aren't in tune with these types of video games, right? If you don't like the gore, if you don't like seeing spines and skulls ripped out of bodies, which again is understandable,
Right.
there's this rating system to be like, hey, like there's some content in here that you might not enjoy, right? So
Right. And
this
I
either
will
may
say
not
that's
be okay
fair.
for you or your kids, you know?
Yeah,
So
and I
yeah,
totally think
maybe it
that's
was a
fair.
blessing to, yeah. Yeah.
I think so too. I think that it took a game like this for people to really realize, and I think, speaking retro game night, sort of style of what I believe in here, I think that this was kind of like a time where people really started to really take games, I want to say, I guess you could say seriously, in the sense that it was something very impactful, whereas maybe Atari, NES even was kind of like, okay, like, games, whatever, nerds, geeks. Games like this, holy shit, I mean, this is kind of real. Like, I'm a little concerned. Our kids are seeing some, guts and gore, and they'll look at it and be like, holy crap, yeah, it looks really, really authentic. Maybe we should start putting ratings. And that's something that I'm kind of glad that they did do, because now we don't have the ESRB in the same way. It's rated differently now as far as, classification of letters or whatever. But and to this day, we still have that. So, like you said, Losi, if we're gonna watch something and your child is near or whatever, you get to determine, okay, I got a heads up that this game is going to have X, Y, and Z in it. And I think that fits right in line with, television and movies nowadays. You know kind of more or less what's to be expected, and
Yeah.
you can kind of make your decision after that.
And I think they also, as a franchise, took it to the next level too with the games to follow. So they had, babalities and friendship. Obviously, we're talking about Mortal
Yeah.
Kombat 1, but you can tell, they were like, okay, well, we're gonna do something where now we have friendship, or we have, these fun. I don't want to say fatalities, but funalities. Where now they're trying to be like, okay, well, you don't have to make it this way. You can also do it, as a friendship way. Again,
Right.
it's just all with the game. Like, you're playing a game at the end of the day, enjoy the game, retro game, all these games, they unlock, this nostalgic feel, and it just brings back core memories. And I guess that's really the importance of it. And playing it today was amazing, because there was a point when I'm like, man, this was really cool. Like, I didn't want to stop playing, and we started like YouTube like the games, so I thought it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, I will say I enjoyed every bit of it. Now let's get into a little bit of the comparisons. I think that there's a lot to be said about the comparisons, more than I remember. So we didn't compare the Game Gear, Game Boy versions, but we did do the SNES and Genesis. So I'll kick it off. I think SNES and Genesis differences, it was, yeah, pretty crazy different as far as the graphics are. Seems a little more cleaned up on the SNES. The buttons, it's exactly how I remember it. It wasn't very responsive to me, and that's definitely not the system, because I remember that. I actually owned the actual copy of the game in the actual SNES. It was the same way from what I remember. Doing moves was a little bit more troublesome. I don't want to call it a delay or a lag, but it just felt like it was just, maybe it is. Maybe it's just a little bit of a slower, like I needed to be a bit slower on the input. But music was horrible. I think the music was horrible in the SNES version. Now that I had played each one back to back, I never would have thought music was a thing back then, because I'm just playing something fun and sort of violent at the time. But now I'm like, yeah, the music really isn't that great in SNES. Genesis, I thought music was great. Graphics took a bit of a dive there. And of course, the censorship, I think that as much as we were tight about the violence, I think that that's kind of, we have to just admit that's the basis of MK, and I kind of miss that.
Yeah, just talking about the console version, you're correct. Like it's it's Mortal Kombat, right? And with that being said, it was the Nintendo version of Mortal Kombat, and so it was lacking in a few areas. And once you play the arcade version, you don't really just remember how much that really does play effect, like you said, until you miss those things. And so I will say the SNES version and the Sega version, where it was there were, yeah, I'm glad we're doing all three perspectives because each version really did have their pros, have their cons.
Right.
I was always a Super Nintendo player, so I had a little bit more comfortable feel with the Super Nintendo controller. Whereas that Genesis, I was completely lost, to be
Right.
completely fair with you. It was, yeah, it was just super alien. And so I'm trying to figure out blocks and kicks and everything else. Not only that, but like the aspect, I noticed one of my first things I noticed was the aspect of the screen. It
Yeah.
seemed like the hit bar, your scores, all that was like it's like a microscope, a microcosm up on the top. I don't
Of
know,
the
it's just
Sega
hard to
version.
read.
Yeah.
It didn't flow with the screen. At least the Nintendo version had that, but then the Nintendo version had crappy music, right? And then the
Did.
Sega version
Yeah.
was a little bit better. So there was hit and misses on both versions, and if I'm glad we're gonna talk about the arcade version separately because yeah, that deserves its own respect.
Dude, we got to keep in mind this is a 16-bit console, so
Both of them are.
you
Yeah.
can only do so much with it. And I think when you play the two games, honestly, I'm gonna say SNES was better for me. I like the graphics, the what they showed was better. Again, what to echo what Losi said, the sound in Sega was better, but in the stage that so in Losi's background, right? So let's say that's an arcade version. On that one stage for let's say SNES, it looks close to that. The Genesis version of that stage that he's in, they're broken up characters, the things in the background, the players or the fighters, you kind of lose that. Um, I want to say like what he's talking about, like the aspect ratio looks so different for Sega, but the sound is better in Sega. But the SNES flipped the switch. They wanted to put more into the graphics and the backgrounds and all the fighters where it looks better, but the sound isn't as good. Which it
Right.
depends on what you like. And then of course the arcade version has the complete package where you're like, cool, like I get both. I get the sound and I get the cool graphics and I get the complete background, the stages that they're at. It's just that, again, 16-bit consoles, everything's pixelated. You see everything and you're just like, they replicated off of these characters that are real people that they recorded to do these moves, and you see these characters and it's not like, again, so comparing it to not Super Nintendo, comparing it to Street Fighter, they're like cartoonish, so they could do possibly more, but these were real, factual people that they recorded for this, and they put it in a video game, and you could see these. Look at the players behind me, like the fighters behind me. They're real people that they recorded to do all these moves,
Yeah.
and to put that in a 16-bit game, you're gonna lose certain things, right? So you're not gonna you can't have the complete package. The arcade version, amazing because they had all, but the SNES sound lacked. But they had the fight. They had the sound when Scorpion would throw his Scorpion. So you didn't hear that in Sega. Sega did not have that, and I thought that was a little bit different. You hear the come here,
Yeah.
but you didn't hear the spear being thrown. In Nintendo, you heard the spear being thrown and the come here, and that's just those little differences. Actually, for some people, like it means a lot. I preferably would want to play the SNES over the Genesis. Sorry, Sega, but if I was choosing a home console, it would be that. But of course, arcade version, bar none, took the best of both worlds.
Now let's go to the arcade version. What, Earl, what did you take from the arcade version now that we're talking about all this stuff? I mean, how cool was that playing that after the comparison?
Yeah, and I think we played the arcade version a lot longer than we played the other two, but arcade had it all. Like that brought you to everything. You hear the sound, you're playing the gameplay, and I think the responsiveness of the controller too. Even though we had the joystick, I think again it brought you back to being in an arcade. Put the quarters in, and it
Yeah.
even said it too. Like it said when we played the arcade, it had credits on the bottom, like
Right.
as if you put in quarters. Like you didn't have that, on the other two consoles that we played on, and it's funny because you're just like, oh, like you're putting in credits, and I thought that's what I remember more of. I didn't realize, like we're talking now, or like as we reviewed it today, I didn't realize there was such a discrepancy or a difference between Sega and SNES and then the arcade. Arcade is what I remembered growing up, and then to see the two differences or the three differences just showed that I was like, man, arcade was so much cooler.
Yeah, it really was,
Yeah.
especially looking back. Losi, your thoughts on the arcade? What do you have to say?
Yeah, totally right, Earl. You hit the nail on the head. I think again, the arcade version was just the complete package. It just seems weird to me that that was the version that came out first, right? Typically, versions get better as they go on, but as we had mentioned, though, this just wasn't the case because of its violence and everything else. So um, that just confirms, though, that how much I kind of felt that that was necessary in the game.
Yeah.
And with that being said, like you said, the credits, everything else, it was so much more that that arcade version brought. It brought even a more competitive feel to it, and it just everything else
Mhm.
that that arcade version encompassed. It really did elevate it, and so that's why um, if I had a rate them all, which I plan to do here shortly with all you guys, there is definitely a different ranking system amongst these three titles.
So now that we're on the subject of MK1, I do have some notes that we're in the gaming industry when it comes to retro, but we know that in our show we talk about obviously new and how it correlates. MK1, as I started this episode talking about, MK1 was just announced for the more recent generation of consoles. There's a lot to be said there, and that's what made me think of doing this. What do we know about the game so far that we can think about? I know that there is some characters coming back. This is open to both you, Earl, and Losi. Go ahead and chime in anytime you feel like. I know a little bit about it. What do we know as far as the game MK1 on the recent announcement?
I will say this, Damien. I think this is actually a really good question because this made me think about this. And we talked about like, okay, where's Mortal Kombat even at nowadays?
Right.
So with that being said, I'm like, I kind of hope this is a reboot because as of right now, I don't understand at all where this series is at. We're talking there's now 11, right? I pretty sure I lost touch of anything related to Mortal Kombat and storyline wise after three, because there was no movies after the first one. Really, they of course did that reboot one, but other than that, there hasn't been any major follow ups to the storyline. And so I feel like now is maybe that time to okay, let's do a reset. And so that's what I'm hoping for. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's where I'm at.
And I, going back, I think Ed Boon is rebranding, right? To say, like Mortal Kombat, like you said, Mike, has slipped off a little bit, but with this MK1 and don't call it MK11, we'll just call it MK1, go back to the roots. And I think it's, to me, looking at it, I guess as a business aspect, he's probably, I don't say rebranding, but he's bringing back up, these old characters, Liu Kang, and I guess there's this like god. He's gonna be this god, fire god, or something like that. Again, I think it's gonna be interesting enough to say what Ed Boon wants to go with this franchise and try to bring back what has held clear from the OG one, and I'm excited to see it.
There is a question I'll pose, a couple of questions that I'll pose that I think a lot of modern gamers that are retro gamers too might appreciate. One, where did we lose touch with Mortal Kombat? That's a deep question. And two, do we need a reboot? And that's where I'll go first to the first one here. Earl, where did you lose touch with Mortal Kombat? Like Losi said, there was a point in time, and admittedly for
Yeah.
me too, there's a point in time where we kind of stopped following or kind of caring. Why is that, and where was it for you?
Okay, Mortal Kombat 1 set the tone. Mortal Kombat 2 blew me out the water. I was like, oh, okay, here we go. Now we have all these games. I think, for me personally, I think I lost. Oh, man, it would have to be. I probably played I haven't touched the last couple games. I think it was more Mortal Kombat 1 and 2. Um, and that's what my core memory is with Mortal Kombat. Otherwise, as of recent, maybe the last decade, I haven't really,
Yeah, same
played
here.
it or and you've seen anything Mortal Kombat worthy about like, okay, cool, like let's go do that. But I think now with the hype behind Mortal Kombat 1 and seeing and hearing everybody, talk about it and they're talking about all these, I don't know if you saw the trailer, but
Right.
it brings that feel like, holy smokes, like here we go again.
Yeah.
And I'm more intrigued, and that's again why we're doing this podcast for Mortal Kombat and bringing it out. But I think I lost maybe after two or three. Once they brought all the cyborgs in, which I thought were really cool, with Smoke, and if we're talking about all those new characters. I think after it got kind of crazy, and I was like, okay, well, this is kind of going Killer Instinct-ish or whatever. It's
Right.
the same thing with Street Fighter. You lose contact. You lose touch with, unless you're doing like a collab, right? So like, Marvel versus Street Fighter, like that kind of brought it up again. But to keep Mortal Kombat, in its own realm and not do a collab and now rebrand or wherever the focus that they're going, I think that's smart in their play. But again, I don't know. I probably would have loved to see. I think we talked about this before. A Killer Instinct Mortal Kombat collab. I think that would be crazy. So if any of you guys are listening that are the developers, maybe you want to kind of open that Pandora's box. But overall, that's probably when I lost touch, when it kind of became redundant with all the characters, and it just became way too much. And you're just like, okay, like cool, yeah.
I think that in Losi, you said after 3. For me, it was one after. I want to say it was Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, and that was in the arcade. That must have been like late 90s at that point. It was before Mortal Kombat 4 came out. When that was in 3D, I checked out. 3D, something about 3D did not sit well with me. I didn't think it was the type of game that could do that. It looked a little bit weird for me. It wasn't like I thought twice of it. I thought, nah, I'm okay. There's other games. After that, there's been a dozen Mortal Kombats. There's been, side stories, other sequels. And like you, Losi, I don't know where the story's at. I have no idea. The only thing that I do know is Mortal Kombat 11 in light of Mortal Kombat or MK1. Apparently Liu Kang gets some sort of power that now he can turn back time or go through a different dimension. This is the excuse for now the MK1 reboot. So it's obviously not going to be the exact same game we know remade. It's a reboot, probably like, I don't know, like, Spider-Man No Way Home or, things like that, where now it's a different dimension. You're getting a whole new, different version of this. And I think it's right, Earl. I think you hit it right on. I think it becomes redundant. I think it after a while can be redundant where it's the same thing again.
I wanted to elaborate on that because that's kind of what I was going to answer. Was I don't think it was in itself Mortal Kombat that was flawed or anything. I think it was actually the whole entire genre of video games, the fighting genre in itself. As Earl kind of mentioned, there became so many other titles also. Of course you had Tekken, you had your Street Fighter, but then of course then you got Mortal Kombat, then all of a sudden you had Killer Instinct, and you had your Marvel versus Capcom,
Right.
and it became just like there was just way too much in that genre, and I feel like it was oversaturated, and it just kind of all fizzled out at once. And I feel like a lot of people just kind of lost that interest for whatever reason, but it was a genre thing. And so
It's a genre
I feel
thing,
like
yeah.
if there is any time to reset now post pandemic, I feel like there's been a lack of creativity in Hollywood for quite some while now.
Right.
Now maybe though is the time for things like this to get their reboots. We just saw Super Mario Brothers, right, get a reboot and have tremendous success. So I just don't see why this can't follow in its footsteps in a similar fashion.
It'll be like the Mortal Kombat metaverse.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see what happens and what's in store with MK1. I definitely have a lot to look forward to. I think that this episode was a really good retrospective on the first one. There was a lot to be said, and we've said it. The only thing we didn't do is give our ratings, and I want to be able to close out with that. So I'll start off with, we're going to rate each one at a time, just a quick number, and why we think the last one we choose the highest would be the reason why we chose that. SNES version, I would give personally a 5 out of 10 looking back. Super Nintendo has a way of making games very Nintendo-y, very family friendly. I think the game had I think it was a bit flawed for the system just because of that. I think had they given the rights and they had the confidence to just go full gore, no pun intended by that, but just full force on it, they might have done a lot better with it. Feeling the restrictiveness, I think, probably took away from that magic. The Sega Genesis, looking back, that used to be a good favorite of mine. I'm going to put down to a 4. There's very little for me to really, truly love about that one now, looking back, though it was my favorite, and I played the crap out of it back in 93, 94. And then I'm going to give the arcade a full 10. For me, that is the perfect arcade game looking back, and it still is in 2023. So those are my ratings. Earl, take it away with yours on each one real quickly. Let's get through those.
I'll go with our OG rating system. So we have a toilet paper rating, we have a 1 and done showcase. So
Yeah, why did I go by number? I forgot about that.
But it's all good.
It's our scientific way of going about this.
Yeah. Let's start with Genesis. So that, to me, gonna have to give it a toilet paper.
Toilet paper.
Just saying. I don't think the button functionality too on the controller was, your block was the start button. Like, I don't know. That's not. Yeah, it was kind of weird to play.
Weird.
With
Yeah.
Genesis controller. So that's a toilet paper for me. The SNES version, I'll do a 1 and done. Mortal Kombat 1, it was cool when it came out. Is it something that you're gonna plug in 23, whatever, how many years later? We did it today, and it brought a good feel, but that's a 1 and done for me. For the arcade version, though, I'm gonna step it up a little bit, and the arcade version will be a showcase because it just brought all the coolness back to how Mortal Kombat was. But I'll take it a step further, for talking about Mortal Kombat 2, and this was ranked previously on our top 5. Damien and I did a previous podcast, and this was Mortal Kombat 2, I think, was on my top 5 fighting games, and that will be obviously showcase. But if we're talking Mortal Kombat 1, I ranked it with the systems, and that's my ranking.
Losi, take it away.
Well, now I feel like you guys left it difficult for me. I have to do kind of both now, like hybrid versions. So I'm going to give the Sega Genesis a toilet paper 3.
There you go. I like that.
the music just didn't do enough for me, and it was just that's all it really had. And so with the Super Nintendo, though, I honestly don't think fared much better.
Right.
And so I'm going to give that a 1 and done 4. I feel, again, like you mentioned, the buttons were a little out of place. It just didn't seem comfortable. It didn't flow. And to know that was a version released a year later after a much better version, it was a watered down, prototype. I don't know. It's
right.
Yeah, it deserves a 1 and done. But of course, as much fun as we had tonight, the arcade version, that brought back all the feels. That is definitely a showcase. I give it a 9. I loved it. That makes me actually really excited. We better do a Mortal Kombat 2 because based on the fun we did have, I just want to button smash all you guys up on number 2.
Absolutely. I think that's going to be a really fun. Yeah, that's going to be a fun go.
Your jump kick definitely.
Pure jump kicks on Michael Losi.
I'm like, oh, you just have to block that? Yeah, it was
then
so
just
good.
a bicycle kick all over. Just
and he did it with Sonya, and then he fatality'd me with Sonya's kiss of death, and I was like, what? Yeah.
So good. Appreciate the time we had to talk about this, guys. We appreciate you guys. Definitely talk to us. We appreciate all the comments we've gotten. I definitely want to hear from you what you thought of MK1, the new one, of course, the new announcement, and also the OG. So feel free to hit us up. Earl, let's start with you. Where can folks find you on social media?
You guys can find me on Instagram. Hey, Earl Lawrence. I'll be there. and send me a follow.
You'll be there, and you'll also be square. Michael Losi, where can we find you on social media?
Also on Instagram, Michael_Losi. Yeah, you can find me there. Lots of fun, as always.
I just love that that's your ongoing. It's fun. No, it is fun to see your stories.
I'm gonna keep up with
you
that.
and your family look like you have a lot of fun.
Like fucking
Damien_DeCarlo from me on Instagram. You can find us also RetroGameNightPodcast.com. Until next time, everybody, keep calm and game on and fight on.
Ooh, fight on. Mortal Kombat. I think it's the best thing.